This is a Sessions video tutorial, Value Study.
Let's explore how to paint different values in this study of a plaster cast of an eye. Plaster casts were common fixtures in ateliers and studios for hundreds of years because they really force you to look at value independent of color. Oftentimes, it's hard to distinguish color and value, so this exercise cuts that out of the equation. Also, because the cast is white, the value range is going to be pretty limited, and so it forces you to get into the subtlety of what's going on there. So I'm going to begin by doing the two-tone drawing. I find that the eye is the one feature of the face that people tend to get the most misled by their preconceptions about how to go about it. The tendency is to make an eye look drawn onto the face. We sort of want to draw symbols of eyes rather than the way the eye actually appears, which is a series of planes and facets. There's structure to it. It's not just an iris and eyelashes drawn on. So this cast blows up the anatomy of the eye and really lets us travel into the forms that are going on. Once again, I'm going to emphasize the separation of light and shadow, the lines at which light and shadow meet. It's as important as any anatomical marker, especially on this, where we don't have the luxury of eyelashes to just be drawn on, that nice, secure marker that we usually have on a figure. Now, the tendency is to make the shadows too dark on a cast because it's the local color, the actual inherent color of the cast is white. We know right from the start that we're not going to use the full value scale from 1 to 10. Even the darkest shadows on a cast will be relatively light in comparison to the whole value scale. One way to gauge the color range you should be in is by bouncing your eye from the cast to the background. Compare these shadows. The tendency is when you isolate an object and start building up the values, it's to take them too far. That's the tendency. A good way to keep that tendency in check is to bounce your eye between the cast or whatever object and the background or areas all over the composition. Something that might appear dark when we hone in on it, this shadow and the cast, when compared to the shadow that it's casting on the black background, is relatively weak. And early on, it's helpful to make a notation of just how dark you can go. A good policy, a good principle, I think, in painting any subject is by covering the canvas or surface first to get basic value and color relationships, in this case, just value. But the big picture is always the most important. What registers from across the room is more important than any embellishment I put on any detail or portion of this eye. Right now I'm controlling value by adjusting the transparency of the umber that I'm putting on. And this is kind of an imperfect system. You eventually might have to come in with a darker black, maybe white to punch in the highlights. Right now the ground I have, the base tone that I have, approximates the light shapes, the value of what will eventually be the light shapes. But there are areas up there that punch certainly higher than that, and I'll need white to note those areas. Shadow areas can be described as nothing areas. Form really happens where light hits an object, and so shadows in nature are hazy. There are reflected lights kicking back onto the cast. But at this stage, the variations of value within that larger shadow shape are insignificant. They're so small as to be ignored. At this point, I have to start thinking theoretically, thinking about what I know. And what I know about light theory is that as a plane that is perpendicular to the light source, that's hitting the light source, facing the light source, will be the brightest. And if you can imagine an egg, as the tiny facets turn away from the light source, they will get progressively slightly darker. I always look for the delineations of light and shadow in a setup with this harsh light source, one-directional light source. Those light and shadow delineations are fairly sharp. However, there are some areas of gradation, such as here around the eye. And that's all I'll do to indicate a little bit of that turn. Ultimately, I have to marry these two ways of drawing or thinking about rendering out form, working from what I know and working from what I see. This divot looks very dark relative to the area just around it. If I bounce my eye then to a true dark, the shadow on the backdrop, it dulls in comparison. I'm going to keep my value range within the eye limited. I'm going to strike in a couple of harder notes. I've been working in a value scale that's very limited. And so punching in a couple of the true darks and true lights will make it pop. When you eventually do an eye on a portrait, you won't have to go into this much detail. Editing is required, but this is the basic approach that you should take. After establishing flat shapes, think about it in terms of a series of facets. Okay, I'm done for now. Keep challenging yourself to apply the concepts of value in your own work.
Did you like this video? Then subscribe today to stay up to date on our channel or follow us on Google+, Twitter, and Facebook. Visit sessions.edu for more info on classes and admissions. Also, don't forget to check out the links to free downloadable content in the description. Thanks for watching.